I want to thank you all for being here, and thank you all for your volunteer work with the reserve system. It's all really important work that you're doing. Thank you, Matt, for the nice introduction. And I want to thank everyone who's on the Zoom link for tuning in today. We appreciate all of your interest in this topic. So I recently as Matt said, I recently graduated from the Master of Advanced Study program in Marine Biodiversity and Conservation at Scripps. And I completed as everyone must do, I completed a capstone project. And Dr. Norris approached me to see if I wanted to do a blue carbon assessment of the Kendall-Frost Marsh. And that was definitely an area of expertise. It was stepping out of my wheelhouse for sure. I was intrigued, but I had no idea of the adventure that it would turn out to be. Forgive the pixelation of the videos, by the way. So this adventure encompassed a variety of field work, different kinds of lab analysis, and then a dip into environmental economics. Can you see? I'm totally in your way. I'm sorry about that. Hopefully not too badly. So when I started working with Dr. Norris and Dr. Costa a year ago, from the get-go, the work emphasized the question: how much is a marsh worth? Perhaps, we can all agree that marshes are beautiful, but what sort of economic value can marshes provide? What about small historic wetlands, such as our own Kendall-Frost Marsh? So we knew that some of the answers to these questions would be in the mud. And indeed, by the end of the project, the mud at the reserve did reveal many secrets to us. And what we learned surprised me and even surprised the wonderful people on my committee. So in general, the worth of a marsh might depend on different perspectives. Marshes and other wetlands do a lot of great things for humans and the regional environment. All the following attributes of wetlands are considered ecosystem services, such as improving water quality by filtering out contaminants, and thus being almost like kidneys for the land and acting as filters and cleaning the water. They provide special animal habitats, such as nurseries to young fishes and larval forms of some commercially important invertebrates and fishes. And it's been found that, say, for example, in the Bolsa Chica Marsh in Huntington Beach, there are 80% of the fishes and invertebrates in the area actually use wetlands at some point in their life cycle. Marshes also provide and create coastal access for human communities, which can be really important in an urban setting, because coastal access is really, really important in general for all of us. Wetlands also buffer the coast from storm surge and the imminent sea level rise that is taking place all over the world. Wetlands are actually able to help buffer against the impacts of that. And additionally, wetlands have the capacity for gathering and storing carbon that would otherwise become part of the climate change problem. This capstone project focused on the last item of this list, where the overarching goal of the project was to put a dollar value on the blue carbon that was stored in the Kendall-Frost Marsh. So there's a view of our Kendall-Frost Marsh. But before we go any further, I want to clarify what exactly we mean by blue carbon. Hello. And what exactly is blue carbon? Whoops, excuse me, I did not mean to do that. Briefly defined, it is the carbon that is captured from the atmosphere in in the planet's ecosystems. So it turns out that salt marshes, mangroves, and seagrass beds are especially good at capturing and storing carbon. And so good are they that they're actually known as blue carbon ecosystems. And there's a growing concerted effort by scientists and policymakers to study, preserve, and restore these blue carbon ecosystems worldwide because they play an incredible role in the offset of the overabundance of CO2 in the atmosphere. So here's an overview of how this works. This diagram shows a profile of a typical salt marsh. The salt marsh plants are capturing the CO2 from the atmosphere. If I had a little laser pointer, I'd be pointing at that. You could see the little cartoon showing, trying to indicate that the photosynthesis is happening. The CO2 is going into the plants. And as the plants grow and die, the carbon material ends up in the soil. And once it is stored there, the dead plant material will accumulate layer upon itself. And the buried carbon becomes what is known as peat. And this peat layer of all this decomposing carbon that gets layered and layered and layered for many meters down is the carbon stored that we're making such a big deal about. That's the blue carbon that everyone is looking at and attempting to measure all over the world. So the rate that this carbon is stored and the amount of stock that is present in a given area is being studied everywhere. And this is the focus of this capstone project as well. So we did the work to try to determine those numbers at Kendall-Frost. Actually, before I go on, does anybody have any questions about that? We tried to pick a that was pretty simple, but of course there's a lot more to it than that. But we can also do questions at the end, of course, too. So historically, there was approximately 4,000 acres of wetland in what we're now calling Mission Bay in San Diego. But construction projects began in this area in 1949. And like so many areas in California, these alterations led to the destruction of coastal wetlands in this region and others in California. And today, only about 40 acres of that 4,000 acres remain in Mission Bay. Most of this historical marsh is found within the Kendall-Frost Marsh Reserve and in the northeastern part of the Mission Bay. And as you guys already know, the Kendall-Frost Marsh is part of the reserve system and belongs to the city, San Diego. It also encompasses what's known as the Northern Wildlife Preserve, which I'm sure you guys also know. So for this blue carbon assessment, Kendall-Frost Reserve, we consider the research questions about the age of the mud, which would help us figure out how quickly carbon is accumulating, how much carbon is present in the mud right now, and then after determining the age, actually figuring out the accumulation rate. And then after all the lab work's done, we tried to figure out the present and future dollar value for this carbon that was in Kendall-Frost mud. So our methods included field work, coring mud samples with a Russian peat core and another device that Dr. Norris has. Once the samples were collected, they were processed at Scripps, and then 2 different kinds of analyses were done with these processed mud samples, where one set would go to a lab for carbon content analysis, and another set would go to another lab for age dating of the carbon items that were found in the mud. And then lastly, I worked with Dr. Mark Jacobson on the economic valuation of the carbon that was found. So here's the study site. I want to thank Matt for this map. These the pins in this map are are the sites where all sampling has taken place or will happen in the future. And I just found out the other day that my lab, oh yeah, I can't really move, can I? That all the pins that, oh, okay. That all the pins that are considered to be part of the marsh itself, as opposed to the bay itself, those have all been sampled. And now the analysis is taking place in Matt's lab. Apparently, there's still interest, of course, in having those yellow pins that are in the bay in terms of thinking about seagrass bed habitats. Those areas will be sampled at some time in the future, when the funding presents itself, I believe. So, so we're very excited about that. So, each pin represents a lot of work and a lot of dedicated people. Let's see. So for this particular, oh, that's the wrong slide. There we go. So for this particular study, this capstone study, I've put red boxes around the 3 sites that we were actually able to analyze to completion for this project in time. Keep in mind that the Master of Advanced Studies students only have 1 year. It's an accelerated master's. So we started doing field work in really December, late November, early December of 2020, and the project needed to be completed, about 8 months later. So we focused on 3 particular sites and brought them to fruition to create this project. But as you can see, there's a lot more analysis that needs to be done, and it will be very exciting to see what comes out of that. So the mud samples were collected with what's essentially a cylinder that is pushed into the mud. And so Matt had the Russian peat core apparatus and all of the field kit that was necessary to complete this work. It was really fun work. It was, as you know, beautiful out there at Kendall-Frost, right? So this video shows me trying my hand at with the Russian peat core with some degree of success. And as the cylinder is pushed into the mud, different extensions can be added to it. So I know that the deepest core that we took was 244 centimeters. Here I'm actually about to pull a core out of the mud. But you can see the work is a lot of fun, and especially if you love mud. So,
can you explain how does that thing work? So how you push the cylinder into the mud, and then how does it work on the core? How to get the core out?
Oh yeah, that's a really good question. So the I don't know if I have a good picture. No, well, we can use this one. The Russian peat core has like about this much of a structure that looks like a knife at the very end, and it's stabbing into the mud. So the knife ends and the cylinder begins, and then it kind of has a part that turns. It's like it's a half cylinder that is still, and then another half cylinder that moves around it. And so that in that video, I'm kind of twisting something, and I'm actually twisting to make sure the door is closed. Like the cylinder's open as it goes in, and then you have to close it and then pull it back out. But if not for that knife-like structure that starts it off, I don't think you can then get in there. And also, it should be noted that when you get through the mud and maybe you'll hit a lens of sand, you can't really go any further. We were stopped a few times. And that's why some cores, like I said, the deepest one that we collected was 244 centimeters. Others were Matt is timing me. Others were only like, whatever, 80, 70 or 80 centimeters because we hit sand. And once you do that, you're done. You close up the cylinder and get it out of there. And then the other part of this photo that shows the core itself, what we would do then is, there are some instances where it's good maybe to take the entire core home with you and you wrap it up with plastic wrap and then take it back to the lab and put it in the refrigerator. In our case, we would usually cut it into 5 centimeter sections that were spaced about 20 centimeters apart, unless there was a change in the layer that you would want to collect even more 5 centimeter sections around. In any case, we collected little 5 centimeter sections and put them in glass jars and took those back to the lab. And yeah, so there's a lot of glass jars in the lab right now, from what I understand. Okay, let's see. Now, sometimes we would go out. There was one particular time that I filmed here where we went out with Dr. Norris's apparatus, and you could see he had a giant tripod. And he had a polycarbonate core device that didn't open and close. It was just literally pushed into the mud. And I should also note that both of these devices, the Russian peat core and this device, were completely dependent on a hammer. Once you get to the point where you can't push anymore, even with the Russian peat core, there's this little donut-shaped hammer that you put on the pole structure that leads down to the corer, and you would drop the hammer many, many, many times. And how much does that thing weigh? Like 3 pounds, 8 pounds. And you just repeatedly hit it over and over again, and someone's usually watching down at the bottom to see the core go into the mud deeper and deeper. In the case of Dr. Norris's apparatus here, it was this ginormous hammer. I'm sorry I didn't get a picture of it. And that just slammed down on the polycarbonate tube to push it in. So again, it's definitely really, really fun field work for sure. Let's see. Okay, and I wanted to throw this in to show what one aspect of field work, you really get to know your friends and you establish camaraderie out in the field. Notice that shadow over me is Dr. Norris just watching me and videotaping my my mud event. So this was a really bad one. I actually had mud shoes that look like snowshoes. Have you seen those? You guys have gone out and you probably used those mud shoes, right? Well, this mud was so gushy that I'm actually wearing mud shoes. And so I was so stuck and it took several minutes to get out. But the mud shoe in that case just went straight to the bottom of that really gooey mud and that thus made it much harder to get out. So those mud samples that we've been talking about are brought back to the lab. And as I mentioned earlier, after some initial processing indicated up at the top here with, I have another photo of this too, but the initial processing involves a mortar and pestle. And these jars of mud, like pictured here, they're powdered in such a way that part of it will go to the carbon analysis lab and part of it will be picked for carbon items that can be age dated. Like everybody talks about carbon-14 dating, that age determined analysis is all about that. And we would usually look for either shells, something from an animal that has died, or maybe plant material, maybe roots of some of the cordgrass. And we actually focused on plant material for this analysis, and sent those samples to UCI. I have a couple other pictures of this process too. I just wanted to quickly show you. So on the left, that's what the mud sample looks like after we bring it to the lab. I should also tell you that they go into this little oven thing to dry. They have to be fully dry before processing. So once dry, so that's a little blob, the 5 centimeter section of Russian peat core that has shrunken down after being dried is now ready for processing. It's processed in a mortar and pestle, and then becomes, this powder. We put it back in its original jar here, and then it's ready for a subset to be removed for the age dating part, and the remainder is ready for the carbon content part. So the carbon content part involved going to a different lab at Scripps, where we would use that little apparatus in the background and a little tiny spoon, and you would collect the mud into these little tiny tinfoil cups that are literally, as big as a quarter of my pinky fingernail, and then they would go into an instrument that required them to be very, very small. So that was the day that you drank less coffee, hopefully. And I'm wearing my deep sea mask from that Lisa Levin gave me, so I like that picture. Here is just a really quick image of the sample. You can see that it has a bivalve shell sticking out of it, and then there's some little snail shells and some cordgrass. And so I was using a dissecting scope to pick those out, and then they would picked out separately and put in little packets for shipment to UCI. And I was really lucky because all of these analyses were completed in like 2 weeks, and I think it was like 4 weeks until I had to give a talk about it, and and that didn't even include the number crunching. So now I want to just quickly give you a little overview of our preliminary results. So we were able to get a general age range for the mud in the marsh. We were able to determine the present carbon stock and the sequestration rate, the gathering of carbon rate based on the age and the carbon amount. And then lastly, we did the economic valuation. So the age determinations were they were variable. There was some variability, but we can tell you that the top 4 centimeters or so were only about 150 to 350 years old, and that was really, really young. But then in the next layer down, it instantly switched to about 1748 years. And so that was kind of exciting. That the Kendall-Frost mud, some of it has been there not quite 2,000 years, and that was a lot more than we expected. My understanding is that Dr. Norris and others, I think Matt, went out and collected another core, and specifically for age dating, and I think that was also like 240 centimeters. Yeah, so they're gonna do some more age dating work, and we'll hopefully be able to fine tune the age a little bit better resolution. And that was at one. Yes, and I'm so sorry. The entire core is not in the picture. Yeah, that was at 150. Yeah, thank you. Okay, so now I want to get to the determinations of the carbon stock and the accumulation rate. So it turns out that the present carbon stock was over 1,000 metric tons of carbon in just the top 1 meter of our marsh. And we were really surprised that it was that much. And I'm told that that falls somewhere in the global average. And measuring the top 1 meter of the marsh is, I guess, pretty typical, and hopefully, comparable to these other studies. But so we were very pleased to see it was a lot more than we thought, as was the accumulation rate, because we figured out that over 15 more metric tons of carbon are added to that top 1 meter every year. So we were pretty excited about that. And actually, as a little side note, you could kind of see the little knife, the pointy structure of the Russian peat core in this picture a little bit better. So this brings us back to asking the question, but what is a marsh worth? So now that we've done the science, and we have data about the carbon at Kendall-Frost, the next step was to look at an economic valuation. So this is a table. I know that there's a lot to unpack here, but this is the preliminary economic valuation for the carbon that we found at Kendall-Frost Marsh. I want to point out that in the blue columns, those are our data from this study, from this capstone study. And I converted our carbon amounts into CO2 values, which is how the economists apparently measure blue carbon in other studies. So that all of our values were multiplied by 44/12, and so that these data could be normalized and compared to other studies. So after the blue columns, I used 4 different values or prices for carbon that could be considered in an evaluation. The first one is from the $18 per metric ton is for the cap and trade program in California, and that's considered the lowest number. And in fact, since we're all friends here, I'm going to jump to this next slide. I just want to show you where those data came from. There's an auction done, the California cap and trade system through the Air Resources Board, where there's an auction done every few months. And back when I did this original project, I used data from May. I probably should have used $19 per metric ton, because it was a little closer to $19.18. But those values reflect what people are already paying, like through taxes and whatnot. And that's different than considering the federal numbers, and also a number given by a researcher at Scripps, which considers the global cost of 1 more metric ton that goes into the atmosphere. So while the cap and trade value is considering what people are presently paying in taxes, etc., the other 3 values on this table are considering the cost of damage of more CO2 that is allowed to go into the atmosphere. So in the light blue, those are federal numbers given by a document put out by the White House. I know I'm committing a faux pas by moving slides around, so I apologize. And note that I have the web link there if you want to check that out for yourself. But these so-called Biden numbers from the federal government are really like a carryover from the Obama numbers from when Obama was in office. And those numbers are higher than the California cap and trade numbers, but still not very much, $51 per metric ton or 76. but what I really want to get to here is this last column in the periwinkle. I think that's what that color is. And those numbers were calculated by a Scripps and UC San Diego economist named Kate Rickey. And she came out with this wonderful paper, again, skipping ahead, through Nature Climate Change, which I think would be interesting for all of us to look at. I mean, it's very long and very detailed, but it considers all the global costs of carbon. Oh, really? Sorry, my timer is telling me that I'm talking too much, a little bit. So I'll be wrapping up really soon. So so Kate came up with numbers that considered a lot of things that the other authors of the other numbers didn't consider. The total cost of carbon of another metric ton going into the atmosphere on a global scale. And her numbers are much different than the other three, at $417 per metric ton of carbon. And so I put all of this on the table and did these calculations based on our data from this study. And it looks like then just the Kendall-Frost Marsh Reserve mud in the top 1 meter is worth $1.6 million now. And in 2070 could be worth, if barring any other changes that might occur, about $2.8 million. And so I wanted you to see where these came from, and the PowerPoint will be available to people, right, Heather? Okay, so these websites are in there. And if you then included the area of Campland and De Anza, which could occur through the Rewild Mission Bay's wildest option, then that entire area would go to 71 hectares and presently be worth over $7 million. And in 2070, over $12 million. So these numbers are not insignificant. And we were actually really surprised that the economic value for our Kendall-Frost Marsh would be so high. And yes, even little historical wetlands like Kendall-Frost are extremely valuable from a blue carbon standpoint. And remember, this is only, oops, too early. This is only considering this one ecosystem service. Earlier, we talked about how wetlands can buffer against a sea level rise and other climate change issues. It can be special habitats for wildlife, etc. And this study focused on just that one little ecosystem value of blue carbon storage and sequestration. And so we're pretty excited about that. But the other types of analyses for the other ecosystem services are going on presently. And Sean Reese here is working with Dr. Norris on those other values, which is really wonderful. I'm so glad you are doing that. I just want to very quickly thank all the people that helped me complete this project. I won't go on and on like I did when I defended the thesis, but my cohort, all my family and friends, and the Center for Marine Biodiversity and Conservation, and Scripps, of course. I'm eternally grateful, but I also would not be anywhere without these people. My capstone committee, which probably looks familiar to you. I would just want to thank Andrew and Matt and Dr. Norris, who's not here, who is my chair, and of course, Mark Jacobson, who taught me about the environmental economics, because again, throughout this whole process, I was stepping out of my wheelhouse. And I'm really grateful to my very patient committee. And with that, I also want to thank you for being here. Thank you for your interest. And thank you for all you do. Oh, probably not supposed to step away from this yet. So, thank you. Are there questions? Can I see the questions in the chat?
I think you can see the questions, but I think you have to go out, you have to unshare your screen.
Oh, okay.
You have to go out of the presentation. Yeah, just this.
Patti, do you want me to do the questions in there so that you can talk and walk around?
Oh, sure. Oh my gosh, I didn't actually show, did you share the screen? I didn't share the screen. Okay, good. I just got scared. I didn't press record. Oh, you did, okay. Thank you. Whoo, thank you. Hi, nice to meet you. Yes. Does anybody here have a question? Yeah, go ahead.
Clarify all of the metric tons in the values, is that an annual basis? So every year it's worth that much each year?
Yeah, the 15 metric tons, and in addition, like in the table, I broke it down to every 10 years. So I put in those decadal amounts, but the 15 metric tons of accumulation, that was per year. Yeah. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
The 1,052 metric tons of carbon in the top 1 meter of marsh, that is just 1 meter.
Yeah, the top 1 meter of the 16 hectare Kendall-Frost. So think of it as like a cake with that layer of chocolate frosting. It's like chocolate frosting was the 1,052 metric tons of carbon in that frosting.
All of 16.
Yes,
That's right, acres.
16 hectares. Yeah, about 40 acres.
So that includes the city property, like the Stribley, so that 16 hectares includes the city property as well.
Yes.
And so I have questions of, you said that 1,000 metric tons was about average. What do you have any idea what the range is for coastal?
Yeah, I think, a lot of the work was done with mangroves too. I want to be careful. I actually looked for a paper that seemed to satisfy the global average. Maybe Matt, you can help. I was backing away from that because I didn't find anything perfect. Do you know what the global average is?
Global average for salt marshes globally for tons of carbon per hectare of carbon stock is something like 200 grams per. So you have to compare that.
And that's a top 1 meter of mud value as well.
The numbers we got were close to that global average.
Yeah.
We were expecting it to be lower.
We were expecting it to be a lot lower.
Why?
I mean, I don't know why Dick and Matt might have been thinking of it as being lower, but I was just thinking about it in terms of things like edge effect and fragmentation and disturbed habitat concepts. But it's actually.
And also because it's a dry climate.
Yeah, the climate. And I know mangroves and seagrass beds are a little more maybe famous at accumulating carbon, and salt marshes are very, very important, but they would probably rank 3rd of those 3. Although there are some seagrass beds there too. So, and we want to sample those areas. And I'm so sorry. Please go. Oh, that's a really good question, because there were two ways of thinking about that. One is that we only had 2 cores, that that were fully analyzed, and we had 3 cores that we had the full 1 meter, and then it looked like, looking at the literature, the top 1 meter was commonly used anyway, so we thought, well, why knock ourselves out? Well, let's just do the top 1 meter thing, if that seems to be the language that everyone is speaking. So, and that's, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. Forgive me, everyone, I'm new at this. Hopefully you can hear me okay. Should I take a question from the virtual world? Okay, is CO2 captured from the water as well? Or does it mostly enter the layers below the marsh via the plants themselves, taking in CO2 from the air? Oh, so the answer would be that the peat levels that we're measuring are from the plants themselves, from photosynthesis. I know that there are other carbon capturing things going on in the oceans, but that's like a totally separate thing from this study. This is all about the peat and the plants that have taken the CO2 out of the atmosphere and accumulated in their plant bodies and then died. So, hi, go for it.
For the future extrapolations, I understand, or correct me if I'm wrong, the 2020 is for the 1 meter deep, and then the decadal moving forward adds that 15 metric ton accumulation as it goes on. Did this include consideration for sea level rise and loss of marsh acreage going into?
Oh, actually, no, it didn't. It was I'm sorry. Oh, I'm sorry. So someone here at the library asked if that 15 metric ton accumulation into the future, the extrapolation, included the consideration of habitat loss due to sea level rise. And no, we actually did not do that. We extrapolated on a straight line based on the present sequestration rate, which may change with sea level rise, unfortunately. If we lose the marsh to sea level rise.
Say the marsh is lost to sea level rise, would the carbon storage in that peat layer, once it's underwater, would that still stay there because it's just buried?
So the corollary question is, if sea level did rise over that certain area of marsh, would that amount of carbon stay there? And the answer would be yes, it would stay there, but no more would accumulate on top of it, sadly. So take another.
This is a good one, yeah.
Hello, Michael. Does your suggestion of value related to campland, etc., assume hundreds of years of accumulation like the existing marsh? We only went out, I hope I'm understanding your question correctly, but we only went out to 2070 to 50 years. So
What you might be asking is how long does it take to get to the point at which it starts accumulating carbon, like frost does?
oh, that's a good question. I don't think I can answer that. Yeah, I mean, because the layers, yeah, Matt, maybe you can help me with this. Like, do we know the point where the plant material became peat? I think that's the question, right? Yeah, I don't know the answer to that.
So the carbon stack economic analyses that you showed are reflective of the existing marsh, which is intact and contains hundreds of years of accumulation, which is being added to every year. And so one question that we don't know the answer to is how much carbon, when other areas of northern Mission Bay were converted to other uses, how much of that, and it relates to your question actually, what happens when you replace a marsh with something else? Field rise or, park up, some of it is development. So one question is how much carbon is still there waiting to underneath can be preserved if restoration should occur. We don't know that, we have to go and find out. But certainly your number numbers are most reflective of the existing marsh.
Right.
Because it does take many years for those targets.
Yeah, I'm not sure, exactly sure how to summarize what Matt just said, but it would take, so I think the answer would be yes. We're thinking in terms of hundreds of years. It took hundreds of years for it to get to the point where it started accumulating the carbon. And Matt was also talking about how there are, other areas that, might have been developed. Other uses were put upon these areas, and there's still marsh underneath there. And, I think that, we're not exactly sure of the status of material that is altered in this way. And, we'd like to continue finding out for sure. Yeah, more samples, yes. Thank you, Andrew.
Yeah, sure.
More
Right,
samples.
good.
Oh, yeah.
This is
Hi,
that
Mick.
Michael Gill family over.
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Oh, yes, Mackenzie. Did you say capture?
Yeah, captures the value of such a marsh. That's the value of what happens now.
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, we would like to consider the blue carbon value, which is a potential value based on the carbon in the mud. We'd like to consider that as something that managers will use in a decision-making process. So, like, Matt was talking about marshes that in other parts of the bay that have been developed. Well, instead of putting a parking lot over a marsh material, then wouldn't it be better to leave it alone and let it continue sequestering carbon over the years? But as far as the infrastructure for payouts, I'm not exactly sure. I know there's someone in this room here was talking about how she knows somebody who's involved with infrastructure of the carbon programs, and that's definitely something I'd like to look into more. But yeah, we were just looking at the blue carbon value, and what happens next is, hopefully it'll influence policymakers and for the next steps that can occur regionally. So, hi.
Was
Go.
this research funded as a part of the grant that the Rewild program got for blue carbon, or is this separate?
This, the recent, sorry, I keep forgetting to do that, I'm sorry. So the question in the room was, the person was asking if this research was being funded by the Rewild Mission Bay program. And I think that you guys put in some money for sample analysis for sure, and helped with the postdoctoral work that was already started by Dr. Costa. So I'd say yes would be the answer to that question, but I don't think that's the only funding.
I want to make sure I have the right grant reference. The recent grant with native like water.
Yeah.
That's the Honda grant.
Yeah, part of that grant goes towards the analysis cost of these samples.
Okay.
that are not-
And still is.
Yep.
Or, okay, yeah.
So like the seagrass samples that will go on in the future, is that part of that program as well, or?
No, not for everyone.
Yeah, so the another corollary question was regarding the seagrass samples that we're hoping to collect in the future, and whether or not that was also part of this same grant, and the answer is no. The seagrass study is not yet funded, so we're seeking funding for that presently.
And that's a question for
Oh, hello, Nan. Okay, so the carbon sequestration was calculated only for the top 1 meter, but the peat could go down deeper. and the carbon sequestration could be greater, correct? Yes, that is true. And we did have the option to analyze the entire core, but we decided to go with the standard top 1 meter for a number of reasons, including the fact that that seems to be what's done commonly and globally. So we were able to compare these data with papers from, Mexico and other parts of the globe that were also doing the same top 1 meter. I think in other studies, such as maybe with mangroves, you might have more difficulty to get beyond the top 1 meter. And so we just stuck with that. But you're exactly right, because that we had that one core that was 244 meters, and if we looked at it that way, it would look differently. But we needed to try to make some things comparable and sort of normalized. Good question.
We talked about wildlife today, but I don't actually know what it means. Do you add plants or do people plant? I don't actually know what physically would happen.
I don't know the details, but I know it's a full restoration plan that I think Andrew would be able to speak to a lot better than I could.
Very briefly, there is no plan yet that the city has agreed to, so it's hard to put numbers to it the way Patti has, certainly. But the feasibility study shows that we could get 227 acres of restored tidal wetland in the northeast corner of Mission Bay. And so if that were to happen, when some of that will happen surely, but not the size necessary. When that happens, it'll be bulldozers pushing some of that land that was dredged back into the water and planting by hand and moving some of the seeds in from Kendall-Frost Marsh and that kind of generation.
It would probably require a lot of volunteers, for sure. And yeah. Yeah, thank you. Any other questions in the room? Should I go back to the?
But we're close to 5. So one question I definitely wanted to answer before we lose anybody is several people asked where the slides where the recording might live. So what is it? Is it the Audubon, City Audubon website? Is that the right answer?
Yes, we can email the slides out and the presentation out to everybody who signed up. So directly you'll get it, and then there'll be a web link to where it's housed.
Oh, that's great.
Patti,
Great.
can you repeat that so people can hear it?
Yeah, I want to make sure everybody heard that. Heather, who is the wonderful leader of the program here, was making sure that everybody knew how to access the slides and the presentation if you should wish. And it turns out these things will be on the San Diego Audubon website at some point in a few days.
Yes.
Yeah, at some point soon, very soon. So thank you for the interest in that. Thank you for all of your interest. Thanks for being there in the virtual world, and I hope that you could hear me okay. Please do reach out to pclark@ucsd.edu if you want to email me directly. I'd love to hear from you, and that goes for all of you too. So thank you all. Thank you so much. Thanks for your questions, you guys. Thank you.